Big Ten football is right around the corner. Yes, it is still a few months before the season begins, but it's going to be here right before your eyes in what will feel like a matter of days or weeks, because it's summer, and summer you have vacations, you have work, you have a lot of different things going around that keep you busy. I just got back, for example, from a week up north where I was helping renovate me and my family's cottage. And at the end of the day, it really felt like I was only up there for a day or two, when in reality I was up there for nearly a week. During that time, in my free time, I decided that I was going to do this video, which is going to be talking about the most critical matchup for every Big Ten team. This has been in the works for a few days. I'm sorry that I didn't get this out earlier, but I was just so busy last week that here we are. I'm excited to share this video with you and talk some Big Ten football. There are going to be 12 matchups, as I think that in two specific matchups, the two Big Ten teams participating in those matchups need those respective games. I think that Indiana versus Illinois can help determine which one of those teams goes bowling, which is huge for those two teams. Very huge after Indiana went 2-10, and it would be huge for Brett Bielema in his second year at Illinois. And Michigan and Ohio State, if Michigan beats Ohio State, then Michigan's season is automatically a success, Ohio State's is a failure, and vice versa. So those two matchups are critical for both teams participating. The other games are, not exactly that. They're more so critical for one team over the other. But we're going to have fun. I'm going to talk about it for about 2 to 2.5 minutes per matchup, mainly describing the matchup and why it's so important for one team or both teams in the case of those two specific matchups I mentioned. So without further ado, let's get right into it. But before we do, comment down below. Just comment, whether it's your thoughts, whether it's just a comment, whether it's to ask how my week was, whether it's to just talk in the comment section. Because by commenting down below, you will have entered yourself in my giveaway for reaching 5,000 subscribers. We just reached 5,200 this morning, so I'm excited that the channel is growing at such a quick and steady pace. Let's keep it going. I'm going to be giving away 2 $75 gift cards for you all to buy college football tickets to a game. So comment down below. The 2 winners will be announced in 48 hours after this video has been posted. So have fun, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell. But most importantly, comment your thoughts on this video down below. And without further ado, let's get into the first critical matchup for Northwestern. We're starting from the worst of the conference to the best, in my opinion. So we're starting at the bottom, we'll rise to the top at the end. Northwestern needs this game, and they need this game because of the tough schedule they have. Their September slate begins facing Nebraska, then they come home to face Duke, Southern Illinois, and Miami of Ohio. They beat Nebraska, they could very well be 4-0 heading into their game against Penn State in Beaver Stadium. After that, they then host Wisconsin, they host Ohio State later in the year, play at Minnesota and Purdue. It's a tough slate for Northwestern. And I'm very high on Nebraska, so Northwestern could lose this game and be a better team than I think they will, because I do have Nebraska as a top 10 team who outmatches Northwestern in most situations. But Northwestern has an opportunity here because Nebraska's unproven. Scott Frost hasn't had a winning season yet. Again, I think he'll do very well with the staff and portal additions he has. But it's going to be the first game for Nebraska. They're going to be working through some stuff. Normally during the first game, it obviously isn't the team's final product that will be displayed in the first game. Northwestern has an opportunity to catch Nebraska by surprise, beat them, and get some momentum rolling into the tougher part of their schedule. I look at this game, and if Northwestern doesn't win this game, it's very hard for me to see them going bowling. It would be possible, but looking at the rest of their schedule outside of their non-conference games, they don't win this game, I don't know if I necessarily see them going bowling. It's not because in my opinion, that a lot of the teams on their schedule are better than Nebraska. I think Nebraska's one of the best teams they face, but they're going to need some momentum of knowing they can beat a Big Ten team going into that Penn State game, Wisconsin game, because if they don't, they could very easily get worn down, and you can go back to that 3-9 record, which I do think they will have. I think Nebraska wins this game by quite a wide margin, but this is a very winnable game for Northwestern nonetheless, despite the fact that Nebraska outmatches them, I think, at basically every position. Pat Fitzgerald's a good head coach. He is not to be underestimated, and he can very well win this game. If Northwestern wants to go bowling or even wants a shot to win at the West, like Pat Fitzgerald seems to do in even years, they need this game. Absolutely need it. Up next, we have Illinois in Indiana. This game is not as important as the previous one, but it's important for both of these programs. If you're a fan of both of these programs watching this, it's awesome that I have some Illinois and Indiana viewers, if I do. But these two programs need to get more competitive and better in the conference. And that starts with winning this game. With Illinois or Indiana winning this game, it's momentum. Because again, win this game, you get to play some of your earlier non-conference, easier opponents, get some momentum heading into the tougher parts of your schedule, get to win some games, the momentum gets rolling, and maybe Illinois or Indiana finds themselves going bowling after not the previous year. For Indiana, they have not won a conference game since 2020, and for Illinois, it would be cool if Brett Bielema took that next step after losing tons of super senior production. That would be a great showing of how the program is improving if after losing some of the most production in the Big Ten, Illinois and Brett Bielema went out with their old school style Big Ten West football and went bowling. Indiana's schedule, I would say, is tougher. I have Indiana winning this game, but still going 3-9 because of how tough I think the schedule is and because of how I think Illinois losing that super senior production and losing some transfers, I think they take a step back. But Indiana, after hosting Illinois in their first game, hosting Idaho and Western Kentucky, they travel to Cincinnati and Nebraska back-to-back, then host Michigan, host Penn State later in the year, play at Ohio State and Michigan State. They have a tough schedule. And also, Illinois, they have a tough schedule too, playing at Wisconsin, at Nebraska. They get Michigan State and Michigan from the East Division too. So both of these schools with tough schedules, a win here against a team, because let's be honest, the matchup here, Indiana hosting Illinois is going to be one of their easier conference games, and vice versa for Illinois. Getting a win here, winning against a small team, can help build that momentum, compound it to maybe win against a bigger name. Indiana, they brought in some transfers, most notably quarterback Connor Bazelak, Sean Shivers from Auburn, and Illinois, with the system that Brett Bielema has, getting some in-state recruits, getting QB Tommy DeVito from Syracuse, and working his system. Both of these teams could surprise some people, go bowling, maybe get a signature win in 2022, but it starts with this game. I can promise you that. We have Rutgers at Boston College would be, I think, Rutgers' most critical matchup. And you get to see a theme here. And I think this is the case for some of these teams that I don't think will do as well. By the way, I also have Illinois going 4-8, 1-8 in conference. Kind of forgot to mention that in the last matchup. And then I have Nebraska going 10-2. Northwestern I already described as going 3-9. But here we are with Rutgers. Rutgers at Boston College. For some of these smaller teams, I think that their openers are really big, because if they can win the non-conference games, they can win some of their smaller conference matchups. That's what you have to do at first before you take that next step. And if Rutgers wants to go bowling this year, they have to beat Boston College. They don't beat Boston College, where are their other wins coming from? At Ohio State, hosting Iowa and Nebraska. I actually think they upset Iowa, but that's still a game that Iowa very well could and should win. at Minnesota, hosting Michigan, at Michigan State, hosting Penn State, traveling to Maryland. Where are 6 wins coming from if they don't beat Boston College on the road? Boston College is a solid team. I'm going to talk a little bit of depth here because it's a team that most Big Ten fans are unfamiliar with. Boston College returns several amounts of their production. Jeff Hafley, their head coach, is a solid guy. He brought Ryan Day, really his only good defensive team in 2019. And he has a possible NFL quarterback in Phil Jurkovec leading the Eagles. The problem for Boston College is they have 5 new starters on their offensive line. And this is where I think the game will be won. Whoever has the better offensive line, I think, wins this game because both teams, their biggest unknown is the offensive line. Boston College starting 5 new guys. They have a new offensive line coach. Rutgers, they brought in 9 total incoming freshmen/transfers on the offensive line that they could shuffle around, and anyone could start seeing how bad their offensive line was last year. Whoever wins in the trenches, I can promise you wins this game. Boston College, by talent, outmatches Rutgers at every position, except for a very important one, special teams. I think Rutgers special teams, they return punter Adam Korsak. Valentino Ambrosio was in the portal last time I checked. I don't know if he's withdrawn or entertained any offers, but Rutgers and Greg Schiano's special teams are always good, so even with his possible departure, I don't anticipate Rutgers special teams being bad. But whoever wins in the trenches, I think, wins this game. If Rutgers wins this game, there's a very good chance they could go bowling because the more I look at Boston College, the more I think that they're an underrated, possibly top 25 team, and Rutgers could very well beat them. Knowing Greg Schiano, I very much am a fan of him as a coach and an innovator. Next, we have Maryland. Maryland, now we're getting into the point where these are more middle season games because these are middle tier Big Ten programs who can actually do some damage and who should go bowling. I do have Maryland going 7-5, and I have Michigan State going 8-4. And both of these teams, more so Michigan State, of course, but Maryland too has the potential to, I think, crack the top 25 this year. Maryland is a team that has so much offensive potential. It's insanity. They return all 5 of their offensive linemen. They return wide receivers Rakeem Jarrett, who's 5-star talent, and Dante Demas, who is leading the Big Ten in receiving yards before his horrendous leg injury versus Iowa. And they return Talia Tagovailoa, who's basically a consensus top 4, top 3 Big Ten QB, which is... And he has the talent to do it too. I mean, he's Tua Tagovailoa's little brother, coached by Mike Locksley, who was the offensive coordinator in 2018 when Tua Tagovailoa was quarterback. So the offensive situation for Maryland is crazy good, I think. And it matches up very well with an MSU secondary who I think will improve, but it won't improve to match up with Maryland's NFL caliber wide receivers, NFL caliber QB, possibly NFL caliber O-line. Also, the reason this game is winnable for Maryland, because under normal circumstances it would be very hard for Maryland to beat a Michigan State team who has just more stability, a better coaching staff, a better defense. Michigan State plays Ohio State the next week. And you know that Michigan State is going to be looking at that Ohio State game, and X marks the spot there. Though I think, hinting ahead, Michigan State's most critical game is that Michigan matchup, partially because I don't think Michigan State's really capable of beating Ohio State. But Michigan State, because of who Mel Tucker is, and they want to compete like any good coach would, they're going to be looking at that Ohio State game, possibly looking ahead to it. Maryland hosting Michigan State, having a powerful offense that matches up very well, and Maryland's defense, there are unknowns there, but an unknown, if the defense goes right, and it's better than I think it will be, then Maryland could very well pull an upset off here, and I do think they pull off the upset, and this will be Maryland's signature win that brings them a 7-5 record, 4-5 in conference, and I honestly could see them going as high as 8-4, but this is a game that Maryland needs if Mike Locksley wants to take the next step and bringing Maryland into someone who can be a contender and can bring in consistently high-level talent and can develop offensive weapons. Just taking that next step for Maryland, this is the game to do it. If not this game, hosting Purdue the following weekend, who I think will be a good team, or the following game, that's another game where Maryland could prove themselves as well. Penn State. Penn State is a team that I think is on a downward trend. So it could beg the question that why do I have Ohio State being Penn State's most critical game when Penn State can't even beat Illinois, when Penn State before this game travels to Purdue, Auburn, Michigan, hosts Minnesota. By the way, I think that it's a very likely chance they go 0-4 in those games. I actually predict that they go 0-4. I don't see how they're beating Michigan by any stretch of the imagination. Auburn and Penn State are essentially 50-50 games where the opposing head coach, I think, is better than James Franklin. Minnesota just seems mentally tougher, more fit to win in the Big Ten. So why is Ohio State the most important matchup for Penn State here, in my opinion? I originally thought that it wasn't, and I thought that Purdue was the most critical one because, if you can't beat Purdue, then the season might as well fall apart unless it's the 2016 season. But then I talked to some Penn State fans, and every year, they were saying every year it's Ohio State. Doesn't matter. And I've come to this conclusion that if Penn State somehow beats Ohio State, but loses all the other games that I think they're going to lose, which would be 4, then everything's forgiven. If Penn State beats Ohio State, even after losing 3-4 previous games, where at this point they're knocked out of the playoff race, out of the Big Ten championship game race, maybe even out of the New Year's Six Bowl race, all will be forgiven because of the massive recruiting class from 2022 that brought in Nick Singleton, Drew Aller, and Danny Dennis Sutton, and the current 2023 recruiting class that is number 1 in the Big Ten. That recruiting momentum, plus a win over Ohio State, would revive the Penn State program. I would be absolutely convinced. And it's going to be a home game. We know Ohio State and Penn State play close. Therefore, it's actually possible that Penn State can pull this off. Penn State, they lost a lot of production, but they are talented. They do have some unknowns. Sean Clifford is a solid enough quarterback that if the offensive line improves, if Mitchell Tinsley and Parker Washington, who make up a very talented wide receiver room, if they do their jobs, and if Ohio State's defense doesn't take a step forward, or if their offense has a bad day in Beaver Stadium, this is possible. I'm not saying this is going to be a good game. I think Ohio State comes in here and honestly, even if the score doesn't indicate it, they probably dominate and win. But this is Penn State's most important game. Penn State wins this game and still misses a New Year's Six Bowl. The season's a success after last year in 2020. They could go 9-3, and if they lose this game, the season still might be viewed a failure by some Penn State fans. That is how critical this matchup is with Ohio State. Iowa's most important game isn't necessarily the same. I wouldn't say it's viewed the same. Iowa could lose this game, and it would be disappointing, but Iowa fans' expectations aren't necessarily the same as Penn State's. But if Iowa wants to go back to Indy, I think that this is probably a must-win for them against hosting the Michigan Wolverines. Unlike traveling to Ohio State, which I think is a nearly impossible task and an impossible situation for Iowa to win in, hosting a Michigan team who I also have as a top 4 team is a completely different story, because Kinnick Stadium is a snake pit. It is a bear trap for top 10 teams, and Iowa knows this, and Michigan knows this. The whole sentient college football fan base knows this. If Iowa wins this game, they can win every other game but the Ohio State game on their schedule. They can enter Indy with possible playoff appearance hopes, though we all know how that will likely end in a bloodshed battle that Ohio State probably would win in Indy in this scenario. But anyway, Iowa, if they want to get back to the West, if they want to still be a force in the Big Ten West, despite their offensive struggles and the fact that I personally think that they're going 7-5. I think that they will lose this game, but Iowa has the secondary, the style of defense, the style of football to stymie Michigan's run-heavy offense, to limit their passing game, and to do just enough to beat them in the same fashion that they beat Michigan in 2016, when Michigan had playoff hopes, when Michigan was projected to win out by many analysts after starting, I think, 9-0? They were top 3, and Iowa beat them by a point. As a Michigan fan, this was a very painful loss for my program, and in retrospect, myself, even though I was much younger than I am now, wasn't paying the greatest attention, but nonetheless, Iowa can do this. It's a winnable game. Iowa, again, like a lot of these teams that we're talking about now, is outmatched in a plethora of positions. I would say I would lean toward them in the defensive back and linebacker category for mainly experience, but Michigan has more raw talent than them in every position and might be better than them at every position. The home field advantage is mainly why I think Iowa has a chance here. It's why I think it's their most critical matchup. I do have them losing to Rutgers the week prior in a total upset game. That doesn't discount them possibly beating Michigan here. And if they beat Michigan, I don't care if it's by a point, by 7 points, if it's 2017 style where they just crush Michigan this year like they did Ohio State that year, they can win 11 games if they win this game right here. And that is why it is a critical matchup for Iowa. Wisconsin. I don't think they're capable of beating Ohio State. So if they were, that would be their most critical matchup. But Michigan State is different. Michigan State, Wisconsin has the talent, the run game. They have enough to beat Michigan State because Michigan State is not at the level of Ohio State yet. But Wisconsin, likely after losing to Ohio State, here's the question. You're 5-1, in my opinion, including the Ohio State game. So 6 games in, you're 5-1 losing to Ohio State. Can Wisconsin and Paul Chryst bounce back? Can they show that they can beat a sentient team? Because before facing Michigan State, excluding the Ohio State game, Illinois State, Washington State, New Mexico State, Illinois, and Northwestern, they could be sentient teams. I don't think any of them are going to be sentient this year. So can you go on the road, beat a solid team, show yourself that you are Wisconsin, that you are back, that you are not your 2020 and 2021 iteration of yourselves where you were disgusting to watch, frankly? Can you go on the road? Can you overcome what looks like to be a very favorable matchup for Michigan State? Michigan State's front 7 is matched up very well against Wisconsin's strong rush game. I don't imagine Graham Mertz can target Michigan State's secondary that well. Meanwhile, Wisconsin loses a lot on defense, and Michigan State returns. They don't return Kenneth Walker, but make no mistake, they have Peyton Thorne, Jaden Reed. They have the pass game to possibly abuse Wisconsin's secondary. If Wisconsin wins this game, by all accounts, they could win out, get those 11 wins like I just was talking about Iowa. They still have road games at Iowa, which I think will also be a loss along with this game, and at Nebraska, which I also think will be a loss. The Nebraska game is another critical game, as if they lose the Michigan State game, if they win out from there, they will still win the Big Ten West. But if they want a chance, if Wisconsin fans and Paul Chryst want the chance to finally win Indy, if they actually want to win a Big Ten championship game, which I think Wisconsin does, they haven't done so since Brett Bielema in 2012, they have to beat Michigan State. You don't beat the 2 tough crossover opponents from the East in Michigan State and Ohio State, I don't see how Wisconsin can win or even truly compete in Indianapolis. Up next is Purdue. Purdue is a team that is very underrated. I have them going 9-3. I have Penn State going 7-5. Heck, I even have Purdue winning this game. The reason it's so important is like last year with Wisconsin hosting Penn State here. It's a game that I think, again, Purdue's going to win. But I also thought Wisconsin was going to beat Penn State last year for very similar reasons as this year. It's a tough road game. James Franklin doesn't do well on the road against good, solid teams, unless it's named Iowa, and we saw how well that worked out last year. I just thought it's a situation where I thought it was a situation where Wisconsin's mental toughness and superior coaching would overcome Penn State's superior talent, and it didn't. The same thing could happen this year very well. And I think if Purdue wants to contend for the West, if they want to improve off of last year, where they returned some of the most production in the Big Ten, I think they returned 17 or 16 starters, most notably Aiden O'Connell, and that offensive line room, and Payne Durham, the star tight end. If they want to improve off of last year or prove that it wasn't a fluke, I think it starts with winning this game, beating an above-average Penn State team. They host Penn State, then Purdue hosts Indiana State, travels to Syracuse, hosts Florida Atlantic. Then they go on the road to Minnesota, Maryland, host Nebraska, go on the road with Wisconsin. Their October slate is brutal, but they do have a pretty easy schedule. I think that this was one of the more favorable crossover matchups to get, is hosting Penn State, who again loses a lot to the NFL. They had the most Big Ten players drafted last year, so they lose tons of production. Most notably, Jaquan Brisker, Tariq Castro-Fields, Jahan Dotson, and some of their offensive line, which was atrocious last year. Purdue is an opportunity to strike down a Penn State team who has a lot of unknowns and use that, of course, for momentum, but also a resume builder for Jeff Brom, that Jeff Brom can continue to just out-scheme and beat down on teams with superior talent and quote-unquote superior coaching, even though I think Jeff Brom is one of the better coaches in the Big Ten. Very, very underrated. I think Purdue wins this game. It's still a game that they very well could lose. I think this is a 50-50 game. I just picked Purdue because of home field advantage, and I like their offense better. And the modern game, despite what the Big Ten wants to say, the modern game of football is more of an offensive game regardless. Up next, we have Michigan State. We are now getting toward the top. So these games are going to be later and later in the season, more so. The game being the last game for Michigan and Ohio State perfectly embodies that. Michigan State and Mel Tucker, I don't think they're at the point where they can beat Ohio State yet. Ohio State just has so much more talent. Ohio State doesn't overlook people outside of, I think, the Oregon game. I think that was the only game Ryan Day so far has overlooked an opponent, was that Oregon game. And I just don't think that Michigan State has the talent, the coaching staff, etc. to beat Ohio State yet. Mel Tucker's been outscored 108-19 versus Ohio State. Like Ryan Day, his staff, his players, they know how to beat Michigan State, and I don't think Mel Tucker is yet equipped, whether it's by his own fault or his roster, to beat the Buckeyes yet. But you know what he can do? He can beat Michigan. And he can beat Michigan, like beat them in the most painful way possible, speaking this as a Michigan fan. If Michigan State beats Michigan for the third time in a row, their recruiting will skyrocket. They will continue to be on that upward trend, obviously. I think that even in my own opinion, where they do go 8-4, because that's my prediction, they'll still be on that upward trend. But if they beat Michigan, they'll probably be better than 8-4. They'll probably be 2-10, maybe 11-1. I think with the schedule they have, and Michigan being their second toughest opponent, they beat Michigan, their momentum will be greater than I think it already is. That momentum will continue, that recruiting momentum, the program momentum, the resources being given to the football team. All these things will be further expanded upon if Mel Tucker can say, I'm 3-0 versus Jim Harbaugh and Michigan. It will feed the program so much juice and momentum to beat Michigan for that third time. And even though I think Michigan, again, common theme here for a lot of these teams, because I just think Michigan and Ohio State are that good to where they outmatch the conference in nearly every position. Michigan State, less talent. I don't think they're as good at nearly every position except for wide receiver and linebacker, which those are still critical positions here. But it doesn't matter. Michigan State plays with an edge to them against Michigan. Michigan State has had inferior talent for every year of their matchup versus Michigan. and they still find ways to beat them. So this is a winnable game for Michigan State. Unlike the Ohio State game, in my opinion, they beat Michigan here and still lose badly to Ohio State. All will be forgiven, and all it will do is motivate recruits to say, we need you against Ohio State. We can beat Michigan. We can beat a great team in Michigan, but we don't necessarily have the talent to beat Ohio State. And that will be enticing to recruits. Recruits, if Michigan State has another good year, will want to say that they can go to Michigan State and help them finally achieve that next step, overthrowing the Ohio State Buckeyes. Up next, we have Minnesota. The Minnesota Golden Gophers hosting Iowa. I'm not going to spend the same amount of time on this game that I did Michigan and Michigan State, or I will for Michigan, Ohio State, or Nebraska versus Oklahoma. Who cares about spoiling it? This game does not have a lot of importance for, let's say, Indy or Big Ten championship game purposes. But this game is similar to the Michigan-Michigan State matchup in that I think for Minnesota, this game is needed for Minnesota to take that next step or to continue the momentum of the program. PJ Fleck has beaten Wisconsin. He has went toe-to-toe with Ryan Day, despite Mohamed Ibrahim, quite frankly, going down and getting injured in their game. He still was competitive. He's beaten Paul Christ, as I already mentioned. He has beaten Scott Frost. He's beaten Pat Fitzgerald. He's beaten Jeff Brom. But who hasn't he beaten? He has not beaten Kirk Ferentz and the Iowa Hawkeyes yet. This game is a game that's very winnable for Minnesota. I think they'll be favored highly in this game. But that rivalry, not beating Iowa yet, if Iowa wins this game again, it's another thorn in the side of PJ Fleck. It is another stopping block to prevent Minnesota from going to Indy. I think if they lose this game, Minnesota's likely out of the Indy picture, period, because they play at Michigan State, play at Penn State, host Purdue, play at Nebraska, play at Wisconsin. There are several games that Minnesota, despite returning tons of production, John Michael Schmitz, their center, Mohamed Ibrahim and Trey Potts, their running backs, quarterback Tanner Morgan, bringing back Kirk Shiraka. Despite all these things working in Minnesota's favor, they have several losable games. Losing this game against a rival before rival Wisconsin, which is their biggest rival, you cannot have a demoralizing loss such as this. I think Minnesota will be a much superior team to Iowa, just like Michigan over Michigan State. But again, that rivalry factor, don't be shocked. Just like if Michigan State beats Michigan, which I will not be shocked, don't be shocked if Iowa wins this game. Minnesota needs this victory more so for momentum, long-term momentum, for the momentum of their program, similar to Michigan State over Michigan. Minnesota is not at that point where I don't think they can, beat Ohio State or win a Big Ten title. They need more talent, to be honest. But winning this game, finally breaking that streak, would be huge. And it will get the attention of recruits. Now, whether they're 5 stars, probably not, but low-level 4 stars, getting in more talent, getting better coaches, all these things will work in favor of Minnesota if they beat the Iowa Hawkeyes, break that streak. Rivalry wins are bigger than they might seem. Just look at Michigan State versus Michigan, Michigan versus Ohio State. Those games, they mean something, and they're remembered forever. Nebraska versus Oklahoma, speaking of rivalries, a game that is no longer played annually, sadly. But now, for the past year and this year, it's being played just a few times more, and probably will be played in the near future. But again, not every year. This is a interesting matchup, as both teams have unproven head coaches. First of all, Oklahoma has Brent Venables, who's a first-year head coach. And second of all, Scott Frost is in year 5 and has not had a winning season. For Nebraska, even with a loss to Northwestern, which I think if they lose to Northwestern, they probably don't win this game. But if they lose to Northwestern, this is why I don't have Nebraska's most important matchup as that Northwestern game. They lose to Northwestern and beat Oklahoma, which watching last year, seeing how some of Nebraska's worst losses were to inferior teams, some of their best games were against the better teams. If they beat Oklahoma, all's forgiven. You lose to Northwestern, if you're a Nebraska fan, you beat Oklahoma. Your thought isn't to fire Scott Frost. It's probably to immediately extend him despite it being game 4. Beating Oklahoma would be Scott Frost's first ranked win because Oklahoma plays a collection of nothings before this game. And Oklahoma is definitely going to be ranked to begin the season. And in this game, unless they lose to said collection of nothings, you would have beaten a team with superior talent, beating a team that not only is ranked, but likely top 15 or possibly top 10. It would be a humongous win. A humongous win. Not just for recruiting, not just for long-term success, because, again, being that it's a rivalry, also a big game, this will put Nebraska back on the map if they win. It's a win for Scott Frost and for the Nebraska fans that have wanted to keep him around and for Scott Frost because he wants to succeed here. It would be a win for Trev Alberts, being the guy who said, let's keep him around for one more year. If he doesn't get it done this year, we fire him. It would be a win for for the University of Nebraska. This game would be. Nebraska here, they are outmatched at offensive line, defensive line, outmatched, I think, defensive backs and special teams. Oklahoma with Michael Turk and a solid kicker, I think will have one of the better special teams units in the country. Bill Bedenbaugh always knows what he's doing offensively. His name escapes me, but defensive tackles coach from Clemson. We know how Clemson's D-line and defense has been, and Brent Venables bringing some assistance from Clemson basically guarantees that this Oklahoma defense will likely turn around or show signs of doing so in year 1. Nebraska's linebacker core, however, their running back room and their QB room, and I think their offensive staff have other things to say, though, along with what I think is an underrated tight end room with Travis Vokalek, Thomas Fidone. He isn't really healthy, but that tight end room, lots of underrated talent, and their tight ends coach at Nebraska knows what he is doing. I think Nebraska wins this game, along with that Northwestern game, and I think this is the game where, if I am right about Nebraska being a top 10 team, being 10-2, and going to Indy, that I think this is the game where I'm going to know whether I'm right or wrong. And in saying that, I also have Oklahoma being a top 10 team who wins the Big 12. And finally, the game we've all been waiting for. This is a very long video, but I only find it appropriate to be this long because it leads up to this beautiful game. Michigan and Ohio State. The game. The game, as I put it last year, the game to end all games. And indeed, it was a game to end all games. Michigan winning their first game since 2011 against Ohio State. The hype surrounding this matchup is unreal. Why is this game important for both of these programs? Well, if you're asking this question, why do you even watch college football? A, it's the game. B, this game likely decides who in the Big Ten goes to the playoff and wins the conference. And C, it's just last year's win really reignited the hate, the trash talk. It's crazy. And just the amount of NFL talent, especially offensively, that will be on this field with Michigan's offensive line and Blake Corum, tight end Eric All. If Cade McNamara takes that next step with his current, I think, great decision-making, he could be Michigan's first QB drafted, and since Chad Henne or Denard Robinson? Ohio State with even more so NFL talent by far with C.J. Stroud, Travion Henderson, Paris Johnson, Jackson Smith and Jigba. It's amazing. The amount of talent here, the hate, the respect, the rivalry, and of course, I think what will decide what Big Ten team wins the conference and goes to the playoff, as I have both of these teams going 11-1 entering this game. Let's start off with Ohio State. If Ohio State, it's important for them because if they lose this game despite going 11-1, everyone's going to be questioning Ryan Day and the program. Everyone. It won't matter that Jim Harbaugh upgraded his staff or reinvented himself or got better talent. If Jim Harbaugh... Ohio State fans don't care if Jim Harbaugh finally became the one of the greatest coaches currently, like the media was hyping him up to be for nearly half a decade, which still makes me mad. Even if Jim Harbaugh became that, Ohio State fans would not care. They would still view the season, unless they snuck their way into the playoff and won it all, with a loss to Michigan, an absolute failure. Michigan might be a little different. I actually think Michigan going 11-1, losing to Ohio State, it would not be a success by any means, but it would be acceptable. You beat them last year. Going 11-1 implies a win over Michigan State. It's an 11-win regular season, which would only be Jim Harbaugh's second after last year. It would still show that the program's on this upward trajectory and that Jim Harbaugh is a better coach than he was in his first 5-6 years of his tenure. But for Michigan, losing this game would be painful. They haven't beaten Ohio State and Columbus, since 2000. I wasn't even born in 2000. I was born in 2002. It's how long it's been since Ohio State has lost to Michigan and Columbus. So this game, I think, is the game to watch. I had it as my number one matchup in the Big Ten for 2022. Michigan State was also up there. Nebraska, Oklahoma wasn't up there, but Nebraska, Minnesota was. There were some familiar matchups in this video compared to my previous video. But that's all I have to say for today. I'm excited for Big Ten football. This video was pretty long, but I hope you all enjoyed it. Just describing these 12 matchups, talking about why I think they're so important for each team. Big Ten football is it's real football. It's, I would argue, superior football to the Pac-12, Big 12, ACC, and SEC is up for debate because SEC football is different too. There's a reason why they say it means more in the SEC, but I also think the Big Ten could certainly adapt that statement as well. Big Ten football is real, legit, pumped up football, and I can't wait to cover it with you guys when the regular season begins. Again, comment your thoughts on this video down below to enter yourself into my giveaway. The two winners for $275 gift cards for tickets, whether it's StubHub, Vivid Seats. I will announce that 48 hours after this video during the giveaway. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.